cause, the root cause of everything, so the kind of cause from which an impermanent result comes forth is permanent. So they assert that a permanent cause gives rise to something impermanent. And then the followers of the Sangha say, well, you as a Buddhist, you as a Buddha, you assert something similar in the sense that you're saying something that is impermanent, such as the truth of the path, serves as the cause for something permanent, which is liberation. So in the same way as I say a permanent cause gives rise to an impermanent result, you are saying that an impermanent cause gives rise to a permanent result.
This is an Tilaya Jumlendi Sumche, and Gulaya Kirangi Gula Selu Juice, the Givi Juice, Nishi Gomarves, and the Kanderes Latu, and Savenda Benan Bumbata, the Bumbasuegi Tabata, to so Givi Juice. Naguna the Chimepana to the Tongurva, Mapana Tremena, Tongumarva, the Tremendi Pumbaselu Juris, Tabata to so Pumbakivi Juris, Lentitelgo.
So in response to that, the Buddha says, you talk about two types of cause. You talk about a cause that's a clarifying cause, or an illuminating cause, and you talk about a cause that is a producing cause. Now, taking the example, for example, a clay vase, so the clay, the material that you use to make the vase, that is called the producing cause of the vase. And then a light, a lamp in the darkness, so when the darkness you cannot see the vase, but the light, when you switch it on, that light is called an illuminating cause, because it illuminates the vase, it makes it possible for the vase to be seen. So you talk about the producing cause and you talk about the illuminating cause. That's what the Buddha says to the Sangha.
Jezan ta tagi kala gore. Yutaba le tibu mitaba yewa de rego marwa. Dina shin gu mitaba le tibu taba top yesine tige yo marwa. Jezan ta dile tiwo tile nangche ta selu ju da yewi ju geje ji song.
So basically the Buddha is saying that it is impossible to have an impermanent cause that gives rise to, have a permanent cause that gives rise to an impermanent result. Just as it is impossible to have an impermanent cause that gives rise to a permanent result. So in order to clarify that, or in order to point that out or make that clear, the Buddha basically talked about the producing cause and the clarifying or the illuminating cause.
This is any kibi jule Seluju and Kiwi Jun and Kiwi Julie Tona and Medabana, that the Chadures. Selu Julie Tobaina and Medavin Casa, Medavin Momares, Lendi Tijundo.
So basically, the Buddha is saying that here that if something arises from a producing cause, it has to be impermanent. If something arises from a producing cause, it has to be impermanent. If something arises from an illuminating cause, it doesn't have to be impermanent.
Tadi goa di ngi ka goa khare la go resena ani kala gore tada chuda me shaye gi thabadi na hin chena dam gomba da tene sardu chubde sharwa mar khini me dingi chi sardu chubu chadurwa.
So according to the lower system, so the way they describe, according to their description, so independent on meditating on a path, one establishes something newly. One establishes a new phenomenon. Something new is established. On meditating on the path, something is newly established.
Jezanta tanda lamdendi ane tharbagi kibi jumare salu jures that did a songro.
So here, therefore, the truth of the path would not be the producing cause of liberation, but the illuminating cause of liberation.
Jezan tabase di chini di shabaina, singi chini di. Singi chini katamanga di yuegarwa. Ine di salmatumi. Dingan so the shematumi, salbuma chabache, digi intungi yonde chadidu, that lamdendi karche resena, chini di salbus yashare, chini di salbus chasadu, Timanda Devi, that Timanda Dedra, the Momba the Dedrudi, and Dindi Negativa, Tabasin Mindavari, in you teaching it. Dilabaina and Selvi Juicy, get it, coach Ligua.
So So saying that liberation refers to suchness. Now here, suchness, the suchness of the mind has always existed. So therefore, in a way, the truth of the path is a clear, it's an illuminator kind of path. It illuminates the suchness. So in other words, here with regard to the truth of the path, well, the suchness has always been there, and this is being illuminated by the truth of the path. This is being illustrated, this is made clear by the truth of the path. So what we talk about here is the suchness of the mind that is now free from all the states. This is what is being made clear. This is what is being illuminated.
That digital re da dinema dus ki jishe duzuta kala la da shemas re da pet ko ra yongda jin chame ki serbo jin yue de yue de ji ma ro da xin ju che do ji de da nge ko le nang de zui du mi du ro.
This is like in general, this is not really something very obvious when we look at the text, but it's something that needs to be investigated in detail. It needs to be examined.
다 tarba sidi di ten진내가 연구해디 tarba sidi 돈은 뭐 제시자 우리 아니 풍부 세바 숨도 풍부 세바 다 풍부 세바 sidi 전에 아니 딜러 아니 걸라고래 벌렌다 와저기 풍부 초직 유모 세바 풍부 지령 세바 기자 말아봐제 풍부기 차시 아니 유모디 세바 딜러는 지금 말했어 풍부 세바라는 자고래스 디숨도.
So, therefore, in general, we speak about liberation. We speak about liberation as the extinguishment of the aggregate, the extinguishment or the exhaustion of the aggregate. So here, Benjamin Shantapa is saying, Chandrakirti is saying, he's saying that it's not okay to say one eliminates just a part of the aggregate, which is the affliction. It's not okay to say just a part of the aggregate are extinguished. One has to say the aggregates themselves are extinguished.
This is 다 주도 아마기 풍부디 병원에 두고 뭐이네 시도 유대고 차대로 제가 다 풍부 세바시도 이네 풍부 균체 봤어 고마디리.
So in the rural system, they assert that the aggregates exist from their own side. So then extinguishing the aggregate means to cut the continuum of the aggregate.
다 탄주 로라 풍부 라탄지라나 풍부 담은이네 명예지라. 그럼 유유 뭐이네 지라 통안에 예만용이지. 아 예만용나 동네 민도알란다. 취네 남대 인사 되게 동네 연구할. 딜레도 된지 취네 남대디 세바. 충남대 세바. 풍매 나와디 세바. 다 가르에서나 풍매 나와 세지는 풍부세 로가 요마로 남점디만 이미 풍부지. 매인사 풍부 세바시디 풍매 나와디 세바.
就印象派的观点来看，会认为这所谓的运图是一开始本来就没有。
So in the Pramadika school, well, with regard to the aggregates, they have never really existed. They have never existed in reality. They cannot. They're not really there, so they don't exist in reality. So from the beginning, they have not existed in reality. And we talk about suffering. Well, suffering only exists as a mistaken appearance. So then, when eliminating here, eliminating the aggregate, it's just eliminating that appearance. So there's really no difference between the aggregates and that mistaken appearance. So one eliminates that mistaken appearance. So here, eliminating the or extinguishing the mistaken appearance is the same as extinguishing the aggregate.
제산다 풍배 나와 세시디 니엘라 딜라나 야비레 냥디 터두기 냥디 원도치네 티시리죠 안디 고아디 라차수나 낭세기 토마방의 고대 고대 와드죠 아니 고아자도를 마도 니엘라 여기디 티시 마자나 야 디낭세기 좀더 셰데나 추로마도 고아디게 두고 말 낭세기 토마방의 고대도 제산다 딜라야 니엘라 풍배 나와 기좀 무시오라 니엘라 터두기 제디시 터두기 제디시디 되길라가나 시 풍배 나와 So here really what we need to explain is the final kind of
ultimate kind of nirvana, the final type of nirvana. Of course, there are different types of cessations. So, different types of cessations, such as the cessation of the objects of illumination of the path of seeing, the cessation of the objects of illumination of the path of meditation, and so forth. So there are all these different cessations here, but by explaining the final kind of cessation, by explaining the cessation or the extinguishment, the exhaustion or the elimination of the appearance of the aggregate, then we can understand the other ones, the subdivisions. So we need to start with the final kind of elimination, or the final kind of cessation.
This is the one so the Pumbo Nansu, the Pumbo Ramuna to Nansu Layo Marwa. This is the Pumbe Nawa says, the Pumbo Ramuna to Nawa say.
So for us, so there's no difference between the appearance of the aggregates and the appearance of truly existent aggregates, or aggregates existent from their own side. So therefore, when we eliminate one, when we eliminate the appearance of the aggregates existing from their own side, we also eliminate the appearance of the aggregates.
That is the Kazan Gizit. No, not to what she is to show Gizit, but I never tell charity to lead. 장제부터 차로지도 계제지와 가서 그니 하게 나와 탐지 추기 인수 쇼스 디신이도 셰크세 제가 딜러디 달로디 아니 돈이의 주제 아니 세루 돈이의 녀르 치니 탈 돈이의 가르스고래 하게 유의진 장책이 나와 매비 추기 쇼제 딜레 달비 다음에 추기 쇼 산지들와 이 쇼도디 아니 추비 나와 탐지 가도랑 예를 치마로다 나와 되게 어디지도 다 된지기 돈이 가서 타버톱스에 딜레도 토베 시다게 민도 다 콜라 토베 돈이 되면도 다 나와디 주변 디 쇼도도 돈이들 치다와신도 파게 다 갈라고 다 땡도 쇼라고 갈라고 디 제도도 엔트나 던지서 해야 되지 말 디다 타르마스
So therefore, this here, this goes back to the explanation I gave early on, some days before, when I said this explanation is similar to the explanation of the Samkhya or the Samkhya school, that it seems similar to the Samkhya school when they mistakenly think that it's similar, in the sense that I've explained that all appearances dissolve within the sphere of emptiness. So explaining that all appearances, all conventions, all appearances, they dissolve into the sphere of emptiness, or they dissolve into Dhammadhamma Tongxing. So how does one get to that state? Well, one gets closer and closer in the sense that when the appearance of emptiness becomes clearer and clearer, one gets closer and closer, one comes closer and closer to the state where all appearances dissolve into Dhammadhamma, which means, in other words, that there's no distance between subject and object. So the sense of subject and object being separate totally disappears. So when it dissolves within emptiness, there's no sense of subject and object being separate. And then, within that meditative equipoise, no longer arising from such a meditative equipoise, that would be the final state. So in that state, that is the state of Buddhahood, when a person no longer arises from that meditative state of directly realizing emptiness in the sense that subject and object there's no sense of distance any longer. And in that moment, all appearances have dissolved. They are no longer there. They've all dissolved, and therefore one has attained liberation. One has attained nirvana. So what one actually has attained is emptiness. There's a sense that what one has attained is emptiness, in the sense that one has now forever entered emptiness. One has forever dissolved into emptiness, and therefore all appearances, all mistaken appearances, have totally been stopped or have ceased.
That the resasuna that six pages in a tigmare in a chena coir. The Garesana, that Sanji one in it. That Sanji Tatula, Sanji one edit that Chini de Moto, Gelabdo. In it, Tindigi Chini Tagaram, Tomani Suso Lavanashi, Manzola Nayundi, Manzola the Chayundi, in Juchini di Imbala, Nambala, and Sanji Yishisu Sharimage. Semi Chini Lava, Chini di Imbala, Namba Yishisu, Manzola Charigizamato, Sanji Koranda, Korangi Namchindi, Ranamchini, Tegar, Sieo Marta. 다 딜러도 군자 탐지 신앙으로 제가도 코란주 예남전에 신의 나의 관에 나마도 코란이 태걸 세요 말다 디지도 전에 다 코란랑 난데 줘라고다 코란랑 디로를 예대버디 신이마도 신다 가야요 말
So there's another way, another word we can use, another phrase we can use, which is maybe not that okay, but actually it really clarifies this point. It really illustrates what I've been trying to say. That actually, the actual Buddha is emptiness. The actual Buddha is just suchness. That is the actual Buddha. So it's suchness. But when we then say it's suchness, well, in the same way as says in the Health Sutra, emptiness is form. So from within this emptiness, as an aspect of that emptiness, we have, for example, the primordial wisdom of a Buddha. So for us, there is the primordial wisdom of a Buddha. But for a Buddha, as from the point of view of personal appearances, the omniscient mind of a Buddha is an other-induced appearance. It's not a personal appearance, it's an other-induced appearance. So therefore, for the Buddha himself, from the point of view of a personal appearance, all there is suchness. So this, from the point of view of suchness, there's nothing else. From the point of view of personal appearance, there's only suchness.
아니 논지sem다 아니 남친신 남대지 디더디잖아요 다 디가 고아디 내용도 제상다 남친세디 주제신의 나와 점을 봐도 사실 권한도 요마레스 기저지 내디리 금전지 고아 친지로나 거로 이 고아 친지로로 사실 권한도 요마레 디다에
So therefore, what comes from that? I mean, as a result of that kind of explanation, therefore, to us, to our own mind, to our personal mind, to us, the omniscient mind appears, but there is actually, so this is only for the disciples there is the omniscient mind of a Buddha, but there's actually no omniscient mind of a Buddha. That kind of wrong understanding may arise, that there's actually no omniscient consciousness. That would be an inaccurate kind of understanding of that, that there is actually no omniscient consciousness, because the omniscient consciousness is only that which appears to us.
并没有看见这所谓的一切性质，但老师刚才后来也提到说，对于这句话有人用的是一种整个错误的一个理解。那你的错误的理解是什么？国家性质的意思？
三界的那么近远嘛，那国家性质了是吧？
如果说呢，
国挺远了，哪儿吧？哪吧？
So thinking that there is no omniscient consciousness is a wrong understanding. It's an inaccurate understanding. It's a mistake to think that.
다원의 개발의 거래에서는 원수기 산지를 넘친 요거디 원수로는 나와 점제 얘는 나와 점도 요에디 요거 쳐봐 또베다 점 대가는 게 요거 쳐봐지 샤신인지기 샤신로로 고아디 야고 용인지기 나와 점을 이는 산지를 요래 납투해지 다 또베다가 점 레스디 매봐 차동이기 되게 라문이 요바도 요베 키바 야고 체마 동인지기 다 되게 나가나신 심진기 나와 점을 뜻이 잡아마도 권한도 요마를 세계지들 내두로 탈투는 디메도 땡도 거기 요 미라오 요에
So, but the difference here is that because the Buddha's mind only appears to sentient beings, so only because it is merely imputed, therefore we say it exists. So we can say that because it is an appearance, it exists as appearance during the state of consciousness, it exists as being merely imputed, so therefore it exists. So someone who has an understanding of that idea, that since phenomena exist merely as mistaken appearances, since conventional truth merely exists as such, so therefore they understand that the omniscient mind of the Buddha does exist. But those who have a sense that phenomena are merely imputed, they cannot exist. In other words, those who are not able to differentiate between not existing from the outside and non-existent in general, those who are unable to distinguish between those two, saying it's a mere appearance to sentient being the mind or being merely imputed, would mean to them it doesn't exist, it's non-existent, that the omission mind of Buddha and so forth are non-existent.
但本来你圣经的那个是当年我送的导样的语的语境去的出下有处是但这本那些我记得送了这个查着了就是可能给我的语境你有嘛但我的语境你有的来的个是呢아니 미신다기 있다나 대시 저거이나 얘는 코랑이 제토기 내고서 다 냠샤리 야 랑차니 대기니라 슬람 두스 대시 저거이나 신의 돈이디 유래 엔티 동이 이시버리 유진레스 대시 지게요래 저 레데 다 대시 저거 다가랑기 딱하게 유진이 요거 쳐봐 또베 따서 이버디 요거 쳐봐지 샤오나 아니 유진이 요래 스케치 티어봐 돈이디 유래 유진 말에 시버디 돈이 말에 유진레스 스케치 티어요 다 딜라마 투비 상의 내용들 또베 따서 유비 요거 쳐봐디 다다 샤마 투비 상의 내용들 호랑이 원은 유진이 매인자 다 제상 돈이 쓰는 호랑이 시버스는 호랑이 스타일이다 걸라고 그랬다 수소랑 리스는 또 근데디 호랑이 리스에게 뜻이야 신다들이 내용도
For example, when you talk about so when we talk about when a sentient being realizes emptiness, when a sentient being realizes emptiness, directly in that moment, there's a sense that subject and object are no distance between, there's no difference between subject and object, there's no distinguishment between those two. It's like water being poured into water. So when we say from the point of view, from the perspective of that person, there's no difference between subject and object. That is true from the perspective of that meditative active. So therefore, when we say there is a difference, that is only from the perspective of another person looking at the meditative active voice, saying that the emptiness and the meditative active voice, one is the object, one is the mind that receives the object. Or in the case of that sentient being, when they arise from the meditative active voice, when they are in the subsequent state, they go back in time, as in like saying that early on, when I realized emptiness directly, then there was no sense of when there was a subject which was the mind, or the object possessor which was the mind, and there was the object. So this distance is only created later on. For that mind itself, for the mind that realizes emptiness directly, there is no such difference. However, for those people who think that whatever is, for those who assert that whatever is merely imputed does not exist, then they would say that there, at that time there was no subject and object. They wouldn't assert that there wouldn't be no sense of the same assertion, so they would go into a totally wrong kind of direction. They would not be able to establish this. But here, from the point of view of our own system, in the sense that the mention of active is directly realizing emptiness, for that mind there is no subject and object, there's no distinguishment. It is only from the perspective of a different person or at a different time that one looks at this and one sees that distinguishment as being merely imputed or being imputed by conceptual consciousness. So in other words, only for those, so therefore this being the key evidence, those who are unable to distinguish between lack of inherent existence and non-existence in general, unable to understand that that which is merely imputed nonetheless exists. So for those, the explanation becomes different. Their views go in a different direction.
Chezanta kalawure ta sanji thadu se ure ta mingda ta khora bichi mingda jorda une wanda chinyin de che ane di ganda chinyin timada dewa di ta khol chibo chade ra dini ene namchen su shap de ba che namchen che namchen dini wo ta ga yimba la namba su su shap chenbe jimbi kule ya su shap de la So
So then
那所以呢，像我们
saying kind of the final Buddha, saying, I'm not sure we can use that term, but saying the final Buddha,
为了让
the kind
大
of
家可以得
ultimate
到
final
理解
Buddha
的
here
同时，我还是
is
用这样子
suchness.
他们的
So suchness, which is free from any kind of defilement.
就近的佛只是
So
法
then
性。
that suchness which is free from any type of
那所
defilement,
谓的法，
that
然后法性它
arises
有
in
它
the
离
form
垢
of
的这个
a
部分。
unconditional
那法
consciousness.
性跟离垢的
And
这
then
两者呢，
being in the nature of such
它其实就是
suchness and the nature of such unconditional
就是
consciousness
我们
being
在讲
in
这
the
个一切
nature of
偏执。
those,
那这
then
个一切偏
the
执呢，当
different
它显
emanations,
现
the
出来，
different
如果它要显现出形
manifestations
象
of
化
the
的
Buddha, with the
那
different
包括它显现
marks,
出
major and minor
32
marks,
相
they
八十
manifest.
好
So
种
you
种
then
的这种
have the
化身
the
跟报身，
Sambhogakaya,
那由这
you
样
have
子
the
的一种
Nirvana
显
and
现
so
形象，
forth.
就
So
是由
these
一切
different
偏执本身
emanations
显
working
现
for
出
the
来这个
benefit of
形
sentient
象，
beings,
然后的
they
这个
are
化身以
manifested,
及报
but
身
which
呢，
are in the
才
nature
能
of
够
such
我们说的做种种的这种佛行事业。
제자다 किसी तिंडी की कोहज ताता योबाइना 제자 코랑기 뭐나 코랑기 태거 시용디 풍미 나와디기 군주비 나와다니 다 요바르와 디 인자 다기 풍부 균치 세기 지 타바토 풍부 균마체나 타바링민도 아세기 고하디 따다지 레딩이 이내 풍부 요딩이 요루디 다 샹나 나유고네 지시자 요딩이 다디 로드 추레다 가고도 샹나 나와서 브레스디 남사 매바 차로 지기도 다베 또베 따즈 유 세딩가 주탄다 고디 요마르와 간지 샤투가 이나 아니 풍부디의 요딩이 신된 제 요딩이 디지디 따다 레딩이 드시도 상징이
So if one really gets an understanding of that, so then from the perspective of the Buddha himself, there are no conventional truths. These conventional truths do not appear. So from the personal perspective, from the perspective of the Buddha himself, conventional truths do not appear. So in that sense, the continuum of the aggregates is extinguished. But from another perspective, the continuum of the aggregates is still there. So from the perspective of the Buddha's personal perspective, there is no longer any aggregate. But from another perspective, there is, there are aggregates because they appear to others. So it's only by way of appearing to others. So that doesn't mean, so for us it seems if they only appear from the perspective of others, from the perspective of the mistaken appearance that appears to others, there's a sense it doesn't exist. It doesn't exist, it has to be non-existent because it merely exists from the perspective of a mistaken awareness. This is the same as having the sense since it's merely imputed by conceptual consciousness, it cannot exist. But we're just not used to this idea. We're not used to this, not being used to the idea, therefore there's a sense that phenomena cannot exist. But they do exist. They do exist, but they exist and they are able to, so all these conventional appearances, in particular the different manifestations, they exist and they're able to work for the benefit of others. So I think this, Geshe is saying, I think this works, this explanation works, and it makes sense.
제자 다다디 동해 세바 세디 발렌다와 잡베기 리포트 주비체 바나로라 아니 돈유 무슨도 또비 뭘 풍비 나와데 세바 어디를 저기 레시니 그게 리포트 주비체 바나로 송 엔디 된다데 다가라 임바 바이 제르무치 또 송데요레 돈유 신기 교험에 보면 무슨도 통이체 디모나 풍부 매바 풍부디마 리버 빵바 시송비 된도 시에도 없을 풍부디마 리버 빵바 시에기 도기 좀 제시디 엔토니 모송도 도비 모나 풍부 나오는 것들이 풍부 나와 세버디 어디에 되게 시에디에 콩디
So saying that all conventional that the suffering aggregate, that the continuum is extinct, that this is extinguished, that suffering is extinguished. Here, Chandrakirti in his commentary on the 60 stanzas on emptiness, the 60 stanzas of reasoning, in Chandrakirti's commentary on the 60 stanzas on reasoning, so in that commentary, Chandrakirti is saying that from the perspective of the mind, from the direct perception which directly realizes emptiness, all the aggregates, the aggregates are extinguished. And then Namatsangkhapa, using that as a source text, says the same thing when he says that from the perspective of the mind that realizes the lack of inherent existence directly, the aggregates are completely eliminated. So this quote of the aggregates being eliminated that we find in the sutra system, this is explained to be from the perspective of the awareness that realizes emptiness directly.
That is it. Today, Yanjaji share the any Kazangamaki Chilchon, Ramuni to a Minawa Tagara, Ramuni Meba, Nonsu Soba, Sheba Series. Ramuni to Manawa Tagara, Ramuni Meba, Nonsu Sobachi. Ramuni Meba, Nonsu Soding each. Ramuni to a Manana, Tagara, Ramuni Meba, Nonsu Res. Ramuni Meba, Nons in a Pagachi, Pumbakawana, and Shigoma. Ramuni Meba, Nons, Ramuni to Minawa Tagara, yes.
Again, also something that was explained before, that the non-appearance of phenomena being established by way of their own, but from their own side, is the appearance of the lack of existing from its own side.
Kandariya, any Kamburanguna Juba, that the Dilabro, Pumbin needs to the Tan. Pumbin needs to the Tani. That Pumbo Ramuni to a now the Cardudi, now the Cardudis and Dinang Lola Cario Resina, Pumbo Ramuni to the cake door, that Loting one. And Pumbi now the Cardor, Nidua. That Pumbi now the Pumbo Ramuni to a cake dodi, Loting or the Yamdo Leum, the Dinidi, Yamdo Leg door, Pumbo Ramuni to now say city, Ramuni to a cake but the Yamdo Leg door. Jason Dilla. Ramuna Juba the Kibi Chane, don't need it. Ramuna Juba now the Kibi Chane, or tension. The Bangja say the Tunang de Laiba, Ramuna Juba now Tagara, that Pumbu Pumbusine, Pumuramun Juba now Tagara Chadera. Jason that now the Kibi Chane, or tension. Ramuna Juba the Kibi Chane, don't need it, don't need the Potendi, that Lochi Toyaki, Nichuchi to Chamora.
So when we talk about when we talk about refuting the existence of the aggregate's existence from their own side, so here one realizes the mode of existence, the actual mode of existence of the aggregates. In other words, one stops the appearance of existence from the aggregate's own side. So by eliminating what one does here, one does both. One eliminates the aggregates existing from its own side, when negates or refutes the event is the same word, which makes not sense in English, but it's like one eliminates the lack, one eliminates existence from its own side, the aggregates existence from their own side, and one eliminates the appearance of the aggregates from their own side. So the same word is used here as in like refute or negate or stop. So stop as in like one negates, one refutes the fact that the aggregates exist from their own side, and one also stops the appearance of the aggregates existing from their own side. So this means here that with one mind you realize the emptiness and the truth of cessation. Why? Because this mind, from the point of view of stopping the appearance of true existence, that is the truth of cessation. So stopping that awareness, stopping the appearance of true existence, the appearance of true existence, from that perspective we speak of the truth of cessation, and from the point of view of refuting existence from its own side, that we talk about understanding emptiness.
方成立这个显现，这部分是业力。那你断除掉液体是四方成立的这个部分是空气。所以呢，一心对一个心当中就可以同时证明这两个，就是业力跟空气。
다 고된 되게 돈이 마샤는 되게 민두스에 기타 굉장히 유연하면 지들이 되게 돈이 남들람들 또 돈이 나 고된이가 남겨와 제가 돈이 넘치 딜이 러서 넘치 유연하 아니 니나가 제조로다 나베 군저 많이 미실라는 찌기 심상으로 같이 넘치 로가지 되어와 돈이 넘치 많이 비 니나 차조 제가 다 돈이 넘치 다가라 이나 아니 돈이 이거 구두 삼 딜이 다 상당사지 다시 이거 신다 유연에 자와 딜이다 이나 신래
So, saying that the truth of cessation is emptiness, so saying that the truth of cessation, when it's describing it as emptiness, the reason for that is the reason behind that is that when we speak about a path of release which realizes emptiness directly. So during the path of release, the truth of cessation is attained. So therefore, that path of release, that meditative voice, it realizes the lack of inherent existence, it realizes emptiness, and it realizes the truth of cessation. But if we say that the truth of cessation is not emptiness, that would mean that to that mind something other than emptiness appears, which would then mean that it's actually not a meditative voice because something else then emptiness appears. So therefore they say that even the ultimate truth needs to be described as emptiness. Because if it were not to be described as emptiness, it would follow that something other than emptiness, in other words the truth of cessation, would have to appear.
所以因为这个关系，所以你必须要安立业力就是空性本身。
这上第的对阵呢，냠샤 디기 뭐나 냠샤 디기 뭐나 고된다 돈이 넘치 수수요 말해.
So from the perspective of that meditative equipoise, there is no difference of the mode of appearance of emptiness and the truth of cessation. So there's no distinguishment from the point of view of how they appear.
제데 제토도 똑바기 삼만타는 가라 아니 돈이 일하나 라고는 두고 가비 차네 돈이 샤 타바 라바이나 안 동에 세비 차네 타바 샤타미 더요.
So but then during the subsequent period, during the subsequent attention period, when one arises from the meditative equipoise with a conceptual mind, then one distinguishes between emptiness as referring to the mere absence of existence from its own side, and then liberation or cessation referring to the extinguishment or the elimination of suffering.
디제도 냠샤기 남출기 토네 남샤셰바이나 고데 돈이래 남들람비 돈이 고데 돈이래 아니 제토기 토베기 토네 남샤디 셰바이나 아니 고데 돈이래 이 말에 돈이 고데래 이 말에 남들람비 돈이라고 그러와.
So therefore, from the perspective of the meditative equipoise, there's no difference from the point of view of their appearance. Thus, this means from the perspective of the meditative equipoise, the truth of cessation, that cessation is emptiness. It is emptiness. However, from the perspective of the subsequent period when the conceptual mind arises, from the perspective of that conceptual mind then, the truth of cessation is not emptiness.
디니기 나네 안 도백이 철수기 토네 남샤시에디 야발 냠샤기 철수기 토네 남샤시에나 지금말.
So here of those two, speaking of the second case, saying that is the way it is from the perspective of the conceptual consciousness is better. It is not okay to describe the situation from the perspective of the meditative equipoise. So when it's not which of the two it is, we need to depend on the conceptual consciousness.
마디에 가르에서는 냠샤기 철수기 토네 남샤시에바이나 다 분비토니 가비토니라고 가비토니 분비토니라고 냠샤기 원에 여중이 말 이내 또비 뭐나 분비토니 가비토니 수수 여인자 분비토니 가비토니 말 가비토니 분비토니 말을 하기도 진짜 디나시 냠샤기 뭐나 고된다 남들은 이춘이 여와 여 말에데 이내 또비 뭐나 여와 예비찬에 아니 고된 파게 토니 많이 토니 남들은 이춘이 고된 많이 세계제데 따라래 거.
because from the perspective of the meditative equipoise, the emptiness of the vase is not the emptiness of the pillar. No, from the perspective of the meditative equipoise, the emptiness of the vase, from the perspective of the meditative equipoise, the emptiness of the vase is the emptiness of the pillar, and the emptiness of the pillar. From the perspective of the meditative equipoise, the emptiness of the vase is the emptiness of the pillar, and the emptiness of the pillar is the emptiness of the vase. But from the perspective of the conceptual consciousness, they're different. So from the perspective of the conceptual consciousness, we have to say that the emptiness of the vase is not the emptiness of the pillar, and the emptiness of the pillar is not the emptiness of the vase.
Nyamsha inang zuto ne kichi shena ane takilava na shin ane toni nyamsha ishi toni ilawa kan le ro chi gorda ko yawa yom yu jing yawa yomaro ni nawa yomaro nyamsha ishi di yu da yu jing ni yawa yomaro nyamsha qara ngona tete bata ro di la du ane nyamsha qara ki charchu di onsu ki nyamsha kan sheba ina nyamsha ishi toni nyamsha ishi le ro chi goro.
So from the perspective, therefore, the danger of what would we have to say, if we were to take it from the perspective of the meditative equipoise, well, we would have to say that from the perspective of that, then therefore the meditative equipoise becomes emptiness. Because from the perspective of the meditative equipoise, there's no difference between the emptiness and the meditative equipoise. So therefore, that's what we would have to say. If we were to take it merely from the perspective of the meditative equipoise, we would have to say that the meditative equipoise itself is empty.
Tendijena koten chini mo ine toni mani se de kohachi yebe sodo ine kashele ti shega jona namsa kirando sling ra shego chigudu la sheza.
So from that perspective, then we would have to say that the truth of cessation is in the nature of suchness. But then some people would say, oh, you're just following the different Muslim kind of assertion, you're just kind of following that because you're a monk from that tradition. So there's danger that people may think that it's just an attachment to the kind of view that is held in the So what I have to say, I've completed here. I've finished what I have to say.
Any Sani da Gongsenche, any Naninga Kisi, any Peggy Tiva Ting in the Yuena, and the Kashi Peggy Dinanda, any Picture Tatsang Mopesha Lali, Savat in the Yativa Ting machine in the Maping in the Yube sort of the Kisi in the Yuena. And Dina Shinya in Jimmy Tony got Imo Watch to Washington, and Kissy to you mean no any Gigula to Wachena, and you heard that I want to talk you, and Mena and Tom Watch. The two teaching you and not young also, the two teaching the so that is it.
I've basically completed this explanation on the topic that, as announced, the topic I'm going to talk about. So this has been completed. So tomorrow we'll have a day off, and then on Thursday there'll be the opportunity to ask questions. Now, this is an opportunity, especially for those who are newer to the Dharma, so who haven't really had the opportunity to ask a question, or who maybe haven't asked any question before. So it doesn't also have to be about emptiness, it can be about anything. So any topic you want to ask about, if you feel the need, you could get in touch with the translator, and then if you put forward your question, tell the translator about it. And so if you like, we can meet again on Thursday for
Yes.